The ammunition canister weighed 43 kilograms. I know this because I carried one in each hand for 6 hours across terrain that had been a city once, before the orbital bombardment turned it into something that had no proper designation in any manual I had been issued. Rubble, perhaps. Debris field. The weight mattered because by hour 3 my shoulders had separated slightly from repetitive stress and improper load distribution, and by hour 5 I could no longer feel my hands except as distant pressure points that registered grip failure warnings my brain converted into commands to hold tighter. The canisters contained belt-fed ammunition for the heavy bolter I would operate for the next 8 months, though I did not know the duration then. I knew only the weight, the mud that came up past my ankles with each step, and the name of the man walking 3 meters ahead of me. Corvel. He carried the bolter itself, which weighed 68 kilograms unloaded, and he had been doing this for 11 months before I arrived. The city had been called Tertius, a mining settlement, perhaps, or a processing facility. The records had been destroyed in the first week of the siege, and by the time my regiment arrived 6 weeks later, no one remembered or cared what the place had been designated. We called it the Flats, though nothing about the terrain was flat. Every surface was uneven, broken, treacherous. Buildings had collapsed into themselves, creating valleys of rubble 30 meters deep in places. Water pooled in the depressions because the drainage systems had been obliterated. The water was not clean. Chemical runoff from shattered industrial facilities mixed with biological matter from the casualties buried beneath the rubble. The smell was distinct. Ozone, decay, promethium, and something else I never identified. Burnt metal, perhaps, or burnt bones. I breathed it for so long it stopped registering as abnormal. I'd been trained for 6 weeks at a facility whose name I no longer recall. The training focused on weapon maintenance, firing patterns, ammunition management, and the proper method for breaking down a heavy bolter into components small enough to transport through confined urban terrain. I learned to field strip the weapon in 40 seconds. I learned the optimal firing arc for suppressive cover. I learned that a heavy weapons team consisted of 2 operators and that survival statistics dropped 23% when teams operated below full strength. I learned many useful things. None of them prepared me for the weight, the mud, or the fact that every enemy sniper in the sector would prioritize my position the moment I began firing. Corville told me this on the 2nd day. We were repositioning from a collapsed transit station to what remained of a commercial structure. The route required us to cross an open plaza approximately 90 meters wide. He stopped at the edge of the rubble that provided cover and turned to look at me. His face was gray, not pale. Gray. Dust had worked itself into every crease of his skin, and his eyes were red from particulate irritation and lack of sleep. He said, "The moment you start firing, they will know where you are. They will target you before they target anyone else. You understand this?" I told him I understood. I had been briefed on enemy tactics during training. Eliminating heavy weapons teams disrupted infantry advances and created gaps in suppressive fire coverage. It was strategically sound. He shook his head. "You do not understand. I am telling you what will happen. You will set up the bolter. You will acquire your target. You will fire. And in the time between your 3rd and 7th burst, a sniper will have calculated your position and adjusted for wind, elevation, and the thermal distortion from your muzzle flash. You will not see them, you will not hear the shot, you will register impact, or you will not. That is what happens. I processed this. I asked him how many team members he had operated with before me. He did not answer immediately. He adjusted his grip on the heavy bolter, redistributing the weight across his shoulders, and started across the plaza at a steady pace that was not quite running but faster than a walk. I followed. We reached the far side without incident. Once we were inside the structure, behind a half-collapsed wall that provided partial cover, he set the bolter down carefully and flexed his hands. I observed tremors in his fingers. He said, "You are the 9th." I asked what happened to the others. I already knew the answer, but I required confirmation. He looked at me as though I had asked something profoundly unnecessary. "They died," he said. "Some immediately. Some of them were wounded and we could not extract them. One bled out while I carried him. I do not remember all their names. I remember yours because you are here now and I need to remember it while you are useful." That was the first conversation I remember fully. There had been others before it, during transit and the initial briefing, but they blurred together into procedural exchanges of no significance. This one I archived because it established the operational parameters of my continued existence. I would carry ammunition. I would feed the belt into the heavy bolter. I would assist with targeting. I would provide covering fire when Corval needed to reload or reposition. And at some point, with probability approaching certainty, an enemy sniper would fire a round that would kill me. I was 17 standard years old. I had been recruited from a Hive City labor district after my family's residential block was condemned due to structural failure. The alternative to recruitment was assignment to a reclamation gang, which had a life expectancy of 11 months according to administratum data. Military service offered better odds. Or so I believed. The first time I fired the heavy bolter, I was not killed. This surprised me more than I wanted to acknowledge. We had been ordered to provide suppressive fire for an advancing squad attempting to secure a fortified position the enemy had established in what remained of a transit hub. The position offered elevation and overlapping fields of fire, which made direct assault prohibitively costly. Our role was to pin the enemy combatants long enough for the assault squad to reach grenade range. Simple objective, clear tactical parameters. Corval positioned the bolter on a section of collapsed wall that provided stable footing and partial concealment. I crouched beside him with 2 ammunition canisters and the belt feed mechanism. He gave me the sequence. Wait for the signal. Acquire target. Fire in controlled bursts. Do not sustain fire longer than 8 seconds. Reposition after no more than 4 bursts. I acknowledged. The signal came. A flare, red, arcing over the rubble field. Corval opened fire. The sound was overwhelming. I'd heard heavy bolters during training, but firing one in an enclosed urban ruin created acoustic pressure that made thought difficult. The weapon bucked against its mounting. Spent casings ejected in a steady stream, clattering against the rubble. I fed the belt, keeping tension steady, watching for jams. The first belt emptied, I swapped to the second canister without pause. Corval adjusted his aim. Fired again. I counted the bursts. 4. He stopped. We lifted the weapon together, carried it 15 meters to a secondary position we had identified earlier, set it down, reacquired the target, and resumed fire. No one shot me. I did not understand why. I'd been certain I would die during the first engagement. The certainty had been so complete that I had not considered what I would do if I survived. When Corvel finally ceased fire and signaled withdrawal, I remained in position for several seconds, waiting for the impact I had anticipated. He pulled me back physically, gripping my shoulder and pulling me toward cover. I followed. We extracted without casualties. That night, sheltered in a half-collapsed supply depot with the rest of our platoon, I asked Corvel why I had not been killed. He was performing maintenance on the bolter, cleaning the barrel and inspecting the firing mechanism for damage. He did not look up. "You were lucky," he said. "Or they did not have assets in position, or they prioritized other targets. It does not matter. You are not killed today. Tomorrow you might be. Do not mistake survival for skill." I asked him how long he had been operating the bolter. He paused, considering. 11 months, longer than anyone in the company. Command reassigns me when I request a replacement loader. They believe I am experienced. They are correct. I have learned how to survive longer than the men assigned to assist me. This does not mean I will survive indefinitely. It means I've been fortunate, and fortune is a resource that depletes. I did not respond. I opened one of the ration packs I had been issued and consumed the contents without tasting them. My shoulders were damaged. I had known this since hour 5 of the approach march, but now that I had stopped moving, the pain had intensified into something that required active suppression. I did not report it. Reporting injuries resulted in reassignment to a Medicae station, and Medicae stations were frequently shelled. Remaining in position seemed safer, though I understood this logic was flawed. Corvel finished his maintenance and began field stripping the weapon further, checking components I had not been trained to service. I watched. He noticed and began explaining what he was doing, pointing out wear patterns, stress fractures in the barrel housing, a hairline crack in the feed mechanism that would require replacement soon. He spoke in the same flat tone he used for everything, but the explanations were detailed and precise. I realized he was training me. Not because he expected me to survive long enough to use the information, but because he needed to say it aloud, to confirm his own knowledge, to maintain the procedures that had kept him alive this long. I asked him if he had been a loader before he became primary operator. He nodded. For 3 months. Then my operator was killed. I took over the weapon. No one countermanded the decision, so I continued. That was 8 months ago. I asked what his operator's name had been. He stopped working. His hands went still on the disassembled components. He looked at me directly, and his expression was unreadable. "I do not remember," he said. "I knew it at the time. I must have. But I do not remember it now. I remember he was competent. I remember he died when a crack missile struck our position. I remember I was 15 meters away, retrieving ammunition when it happened. I do not remember his name." He resumed his work. I did not ask further questions, but I archived the exchange. It told me something about what I would become if I survived long enough. The pattern repeated. We received orders. We repositioned. We provided covering fire. We withdrew. We maintained the weapon. We slept in shifts in whatever structure offered the most protection from shelling. The weight of the ammunition canisters became familiar. My shoulders adjusted, or perhaps they simply sustained enough damage that additional damage no longer registered as distinct. I learned to identify safe routes through the rubble by the way debris had settled. I learned to estimate enemy firing positions by the angle of incoming rounds. I learned that the sick feeling in my stomach before each engagement was not fear exactly, but a physiological response to adrenaline and sustained stress that my body produced automatically regardless of my conscious state. I was not killed. Days passed, a week, 2 weeks. Corville stopped looking at me as though I was already dead. This did not mean he trusted me. It meant I had survived long enough to be provisionally useful. The first loader I watched die was not part of our team. He was assigned to another heavy weapons crew operating out of the same fortified position we occupied during a prolonged defensive action. The enemy had committed armor to the sector, and heavy bolters were being deployed in anti-infantry support roles while less cannons engaged the vehicles. The other crew was positioned 30 meters to our left, partially concealed behind the remains of a structural support column. They opened fire. I was feeding ammunition to Corville, but I saw the moment it happened. The enemy sniper must have been waiting, already positioned, already tracking the likely heavy weapon emplacements. 3 bursts. The loader stood to retrieve a fresh ammunition canister. The round took him in the chest. I did not hear the shot. I saw him stagger backward, saw the way his body folded, saw him drop. The operator ceased fire, abandoned the weapon, dragged the loader into cover. I could not see from my position whether the loader was dead or wounded. Later I learned he had died before reaching Medicare. Corville did not stop firing. I did not stop feeding ammunition. We completed our assigned fire mission and withdrew according to schedule. Once we were clear, back in the supply depot that served as our temporary rally point, Corville set the bolter down and sat against a wall. He did not speak. I performed the initial maintenance, cleaning and checking for damage, because he seemed unable to. After several minutes he said, "That could have been you." I acknowledged this. "It will be you," he said. "Eventually. The probability approaches certainty the longer you operate. This is not defeatism. This is mathematics." I asked him why he continued operating the weapon if the outcome was statistically inevitable. He looked at me with an expression I could not interpret. "Because I've not been killed yet," he said. "And until I am, I will continue. There is no alternative. Requesting reassignment results in execution for cowardice or reassignment to a penal battalion, which is execution with additional steps. I operate the bolter because I operated it yesterday and I survived yesterday, and perhaps I will survive today. That is the only logic that applies." I understood. I did not agree or disagree. Understanding was sufficient. 3 weeks into my deployment, we were assigned to a forward offensive operation. The objective was to secure a collapsed overpass that provided elevated firing positions overlooking an enemy supply route. Intelligence indicated the position was lightly defended. Intelligence was incorrect. The position was fortified with interlocking fire lanes, concealed heavy weapon emplacements, and a sniper team that had been operating in the sector for weeks. We advanced with the assault element. Corville and I, carrying the bolter and ammunition, moving through rubble fields under sporadic fire. The plan was to establish a firing position on the western approach and suppress enemy combatants while the assault squad flanked from the north. Standard tactics. We reached the designated position. Corvell set up the bolter. I prepared the ammunition feed. The assault squad began their advance. Corvell opened fire. I counted bursts. 1, 2, 3. At 4, I heard a sound like a wet impact, and Corvell made a noise that was not quite a word. I looked. He was still gripping the bolter, but his left arm hung at a wrong angle, and blood was spreading across his flak armor from a wound I could not immediately locate. He had been shot. Not killed. Shot. He was attempting to continue firing one-handed. This was not possible with a heavy bolter. The recoil was too severe. I moved without thinking, gripping the weapon's secondary handle, adding my weight to stabilize it. He fired. The burst went wide. He corrected, fired again. Blood was running down his arm now, pooling beneath him. I told him he needed to withdraw to medicate. He did not respond. He fired again. The assault squad reached their objective. Enemy fire slackened. The operation was successful. Corvell stopped firing and released the weapon. He slumped sideways. I caught him, or attempted to. He was heavier than I expected, and I could not support his weight properly while crouched in the firing position. I lowered him to the ground. His eyes were open. He was conscious. He said something I did not hear over the residual ringing in my ears from the bolter's discharge. I signaled for Medicare. None responded immediately. The assault was still in progress. Medicare teams would not advance until the position was secured. I applied a field dressing to the wound I could now see clearly, a through-and-through shot that had entered below his shoulder and exited near his spine. The bleeding was severe. I elevated the wound. I applied pressure. I did what I had been trained to do, which was insufficient. Corvell gripped my arm with his functioning hand. His strength surprised me. He pulled me closer and spoke directly into my ear. "The weapon," he said. "Do not leave the weapon." I told him I would not leave the weapon. I told him medicine was coming. I told him he would survive this. He shook his head slightly. "I've been fortunate for 11 months, he said. "This is the depletion I mentioned. You will take the weapon. You will continue. Find another loader. Brief them the way I briefed you. They will die. You will continue. This is the function." I told him to stop talking. I told him to conserve his strength. He ignored me. "You will forget my name," he said. "Eventually, this is acceptable. I have forgotten the others. You will forget yours in time. You will become the function you perform. This is what happens. This is what we are." The medical team arrived. They assessed Corvell, applied emergency stabilization procedures, and loaded him onto a stretcher. They told me he would be evacuated to a rear echelon facility. They told me his chances were acceptable if infection did not set in. They took him. I watched them carry him away through the rubble. I did not see him again. I remained in position with the heavy bolter. The assault squad secured the overpass. We held the position through the night. In the morning, a replacement loader arrived. His name was Jendrik. He was 16 standard years old. He asked me how long I'd been operating heavy weapons. I told him I had been a loader for 3 weeks. He asked where my operator was. I told him I was the operator now. He processed this information visibly, understanding what it meant. I briefed him the way Corvell had briefed me. I told him about the weight, the mud, the snipers. I told him the probability of his death was high, and that I would not remember his name if he survived long enough for me to train another replacement. I told him these things because Corvell had told them to me. and they were true, and I had survived long enough that it was now my function to say them. Gendrick asked me if I thought we would win the war. I had not considered this question in weeks. Winning implied an end state, and I had stopped conceptualizing end states. There was today's objective and tomorrow's objective and the maintenance schedule for the weapon. Those were the relevant parameters. I told him I did not know. He seemed dissatisfied with this answer but did not press further. We operated together for 6 days. On the 7th day, during a suppression mission supporting an armored advance, an enemy sniper fired a round that struck Gendrick in the head. I was crouched beside him, feeding ammunition. I felt the spray of matter that had been his blood and brain tissue. He collapsed across the ammunition canister. I pushed him aside, completed the ammunition feed, and continued supporting my fire mission. When the engagement concluded, I dragged Gendrick's body to the rally point and reported the casualty. A replacement loader arrived the following day. His name was Parim, or perhaps Perrin. I am no longer certain. The archive is corrupted on this detail. He survived 11 days. He was killed by shrapnel from an artillery strike that impacted 30 meters from our position. The shrapnel penetrated his abdomen. He bled out before Medicare arrived. I remember he asked me if it hurt. I told him I did not know. I had not been wounded that way. He died before I could clarify what I meant. The replacement after him survived 2 days. The one after that survived a month. The one after that I do not remember clearly. He was there, and then he was not, and another loader took his place. I briefed them all. I told them about the snipers. Some listened. Some did not. It made no difference. They died at rates consistent with the statistics I'd been provided during training. I stopped learning their names immediately. I learned their faces only long enough to distinguish them from other personnel in the platoon. When they died, I reported the casualty, requested a replacement, and continued. This was the function Corvell had described. I understand it now. I had become it. The weapon became my primary concern. I maintained it with greater care than I maintained myself. I could identify problems by sound, by the rhythm of the firing cycle, by the smell of overheating components. I replaced parts before they failed. I kept the barrel clean, the action smooth, the feed mechanism aligned. The weapon functioned because I made it function, and I functioned because the weapon required me. I was wounded twice during this period. The first time, shrapnel from an explosion I did not see coming embedded itself in my right thigh. I extracted the fragments myself using a knife I had acquired from a dead soldier whose name I never learned. The wound became infected. I did not report it. I applied antiseptic paste from a field kit and wrapped it with fabric torn from a discarded uniform. The infection resolved itself, or my immune system suppressed it, or I simply stopped noticing the pain. The scar tissue remains. I can feel it when I walk, a tightness in the muscle that is never fully released. The second wound was a grazing shot across my left shoulder. A sniper had acquired my position during a fire mission. The round missed my head by perhaps 15 centimeters and cut a channel through the meat of my shoulder instead. I did not realize I had been shot until I noticed blood running down my arm. The pain came later, after the engagement concluded. I reported this wound because it affected my ability to stabilize the heavy bolter. I was sent to a medical station for 3 days. They cleaned the wound, applied dermal sealant, injected me with something that made my thoughts slow and indistinct, and returned me to my unit. When I returned, there was a new loader waiting. I do not remember his name. I briefed him. He died. Another came. I briefed him. The cycle continued. I stopped counting at some point. Not the days. I continued tracking days because operation orders referenced dates and I needed to maintain temporal coherence. But I stopped counting loaders. They became a category rather than individuals. Loader 1 through loader unknown. Present, then absent. Functional, then non-functional. I requisitioned replacements the way I requisitioned ammunition. The supply chain provided both, and I used both until they were expended. The sector designation changed 3 times during my deployment. First it was Tertius 7 Gamma. Then it became Operational Zone 41. Then someone decided it should be called the Ashfield Salient, though there was no ash and no clear salient in any tactical sense. The names were irrelevant. The terrain remained the same. Rubble, mud, chemical runoff, pooling in the collapsed infrastructure. The enemy remained the same. Hostile combatants occupying fortified positions we were ordered to reduce through sustained application of firepower and infantry assault. I operated the heavy bolter for 8 months in that sector, or perhaps 9. The records I kept became less precise over time. I noted engagements, ammunition expenditure, weapon maintenance schedules. I did not note personal information because personal information had ceased to be relevant. I was the operator of heavy bolter designation HB7743. The loader position was filled by whoever logistics assigned. The loader died or was reassigned or simply failed to report one day and was replaced. I continued. There was a loader during this period whose face I remember with unusual clarity, though I cannot retrieve his name from the archive. He had a scar across his left cheek, jagged, poorly healed. He told me he had gotten it in a factory accident before conscription. I did not ask for details. He volunteered them anyway during a lull between fire missions, speaking rapidly as though he needed to say the words aloud before they disappeared. He'd been working a pressing machine in a manufactorum when the safety protocols failed. The machine had caught his face, torn the flesh, released him only after someone hit the emergency shutoff. He showed me the scar as though it was evidence of something. I acknowledged that I had seen it. He asked me if I thought the scar would ache him harder to identify if he died, if there would be enough of his face left for identification after a sniper round or an artillery strike. He was laughing when he said this, but the laughter sounded wrong, forced. He wanted me to tell him something reassuring. I told him that identification of remains was handled by personnel assigned to graves registration, and their methods did not rely solely on facial recognition. I told him they used identification tags when available, dental records when tags were lost, genetic sampling when nothing else remained. I told him he should ensure his tags were secured properly. He stopped laughing. He looked at me for several seconds. Then he said, "You do not understand what I am asking." I told him I understood his question. I'd answered it accurately. He shook his head and moved away, checking the ammunition stores we had positioned nearby. He did not speak to me unnecessarily after that. He performed his function competently. He fed ammunition. He assisted with repositioning. He maintained proper spacing during movement. He died 6 days later when an enemy heavy weapon team acquired our position during a counter-battery engagement. The round struck him center mass. He did not have time to make a sound. His tags were intact. I removed them and turned them into the Graves registration team that processed casualties at the end of each operation. I archived his face because the scar made it distinctive. I archived the conversation because it represented something I was still trying to process. He had wanted reassurance that his death would matter in some measurable way, that he would be remembered, identified, counted. I could not provide that reassurance because I did not possess it myself. I knew only that he would be replaced and that I would continue, and that eventually I would be replaced and someone else would continue. The system did not require our individual persistence. It required the function to persist. There was another loader whose name might have been Tessin, or Tessin. The archive is uncertain. He was competent. He had been trained at the same facility I had been trained at, possibly in the same cycle, though we had not encountered each other during training. He recognized the maintenance procedures I used. He anticipated my instructions. We operated with efficiency that approached coordination. For 3 weeks, we functioned as a team rather than an operator and an interchangeable component. I began to rely on him, not emotionally. I did not permit emotional reliance, but operationally. I no longer needed to verify that he had performed basic checks. I no longer needed to explain adjustments to firing patterns. He understood the weapon's capabilities and limitations. He understood the tactical environment. He made decisions that reduced my processing load. During a suppression mission in the 4th week, he identified an enemy firing position I had not yet acquired. He pointed it out, estimated range, suggested an approach angle that would maximize our cover during repositioning. I acknowledged his assessment. We repositioned. We got engaged. The mission succeeded with lower ammunition expenditure than I had projected. That night, performing maintenance, he asked me how long I'd been operating the weapon. I calculated. 8 months, possibly 9. He processed this information. You have survived longer than anyone else in the company. I had not verified this, but it was likely accurate. I told him I had been fortunate. He shook his head. Fortune is not sufficient. You have skill. You understand the weapon. You understand the environment. You train your loaders properly. He paused. You trained me properly. I told him I had briefed him according to the procedures I had been taught. You told me I would die, he said, on the first day. You told me the probability was high and that you would not remember my name. You were attempting to condition me to accept it. I acknowledged this. It helped, he said, knowing the expectation. Most operators do not do this. They pretend survival is likely. They allow their loaders to maintain hope. Hope makes death harder. You did not do this. I want to acknowledge that it was useful. I did not know how to respond to this. I told him he should rest while he could. He continued. If I survive this deployment, I intend to request training as a primary operator. I believe I would be competent. You have demonstrated that long-term survival is possible with proper procedure and situational awareness. I told him long-term survival was a statistical anomaly, not a replicable outcome. He disagreed. You have created a replicable outcome. You have survived by understanding that the weapon is the priority, not the operator. You maintain the weapon. You position the weapon correctly. You do not take unnecessary risks. This is replicable. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to tell him that I had survived because Corville died in my place, because loaders died while I crouched behind the weapon, because I had been fortunate in ways that had nothing to do with skill or procedure. I wanted to tell him that his confidence was dangerous and that confidence would kill him. I did not say these things. I told him to rest. He complied. 2 days later, we were assigned to provide overwatch for a convoy moving through contested terrain. The route passed through an area we had cleared 3 weeks earlier, but enemy forces had re-infiltrated. Intelligence indicated light resistance. Intelligence was, as usual, incomplete. The convoy was ambushed half a kilometer from our position. We were too far away to provide effective support, but we were ordered to advance and engage to relieve pressure on the convoy's defensive element. We moved through rubble at speed, carrying the weapon and ammunition across broken ground that had not been surveyed for mines or structural integrity. Tessin moved ahead of me, navigating the route, identifying stable paths. I followed with the weapon. We reached a position with sight lines to the ambush point. Tessin set up the bipod. I loaded the first belt. He called out targets. I fired. The weapon functioned perfectly. We suppressed 2 enemy positions. The convoy's defensive element counterattacked. The ambush collapsed. We were withdrawing when the mine detonated. I did not see Tessin trigger it. I was 6 meters behind him, carrying the weapon. The explosion was not large. An anti-personnel mine, not anti-armor, but Tessin was directly over it when it activated. The blast took both his legs below the knee and opened his abdomen. He fell forward. I heard him hit the ground. I moved to him without thinking. This was an incorrect procedure. The correct procedure was to halt, assess for additional mines, mark the hazard, and wait for engineers to clear the route. I did not follow the correct procedure. I reached him in 4 seconds. He was conscious. His eyes were open. He was looking at his legs or where his legs had been. There was surprisingly little blood at first. The blast had cauterized some of the tissue. Then the blood came, pulsing from the femoral arteries, soaking into the ground. I applied tourniquets. I had 2 in my field kit. I applied both, 1 to each leg, tightening them until the blood flow reduced to seepage. I signaled for Medicare. Tessin gripped my arm. His strength was fading but still present. He said, "The weapon." I told him I had the weapon. I told him medicine was coming. He shook his head slightly. "Do not leave the weapon. This is—" He stopped. His breathing was irregular, shallow. He tried again. "This is the function. You continue." I told him to stop talking. The same words I'd said to Corville. The same useless instruction. "I would have been competent," he said. His voice was quieter now. "I would have survived. I understood the procedures." I told him he was correct. I told him he had been competent. I told him he would have been an effective operator. He smiled. It was a terrible expression. Blood was running from the corner of his mouth. Internal injuries the mine had caused, but I could not see. "You are lying," he said. "But I appreciate the—" He did not finish the sentence. His grip on my arm loosened. His eyes remained open, but the focus was gone. Medicare arrived. They assessed him. They told me he was dead. They told me to move so they could process the casualty. I moved. I picked up the heavy bolter. I verified the ammunition canisters had not been damaged in the chaos. I continued to the rally point. I reported the casualty. I requested a replacement loader. That night I attempted to archive Tessin's name. I repeated it internally, storing it with the memory of his face, his competence, his plan to become an operator. I wanted to ensure I would not forget him the way Corville had forgotten his operator, the way I had forgotten the others. I wanted to maintain one connection, one individual who had mattered beyond their function. But I knew I would fail. I knew that in weeks or months the name would corrupt, the face would blur, the memory would compress into data. Loader, competent, killed by mine, lasted 3 weeks. The details would not persist because I could not carry that weight and continue to function. The system did not permit it. I did not sleep that night. I sat with a heavy bolter, performing maintenance that did not need to be performed, checking components that had already been checked. My hands moved through the procedures automatically while my mind processed what had happened. Tessin had believed survival was replicable. He had been wrong. Survival was not skill. Survival was chance, and chance was not replicable. I had been fortunate. Corville had been fortunate for 11 months. Tessin had been fortunate for 3 weeks. The fortune ended. It always ended. The replacement loader arrived in the morning. I briefed him. I do not remember his name. I did not attempt to archive it. The campaign in the Ashfield salient concluded after 11 months of sustained operations. The conclusion is perhaps incorrect terminology. We were withdrawn and reassigned to a different sector. The enemy still held portions of the salient. Other regiments were rotated in to continue the reduction. We were extracted to a rear staging area for refit and reinforcement. The company had sustained 68% casualties. I had sustained 1 serious wound, multiple minor injuries, and psychological damage that was never formally assessed or treated. The heavy bolter had been replaced twice. I had requisitioned 43 replacement loaders across the 11-month deployment. 43. I counted them later, reviewing the casualty reports I'd filed. I had not realized the number was that high until I saw it documented. 43 individuals had carried ammunition for me, fed belts into the weapon, assisted with repositioning, and died. 43 names I'd been told and forgotten. 43 faces I had seen and archived, and eventually compressed into undifferentiated data. 43 soldiers who had been conscripted or volunteered, trained, deployed, assigned to heavy weapons support, and killed while performing that function. I tried to remember one of them clearly. Not Gendrick or Tessin, whose deaths I had witnessed directly and whose memories had been archived with additional detail. One of the others, the one with the scar. I remembered the scar. I remembered he had asked me about identification. I could not remember his name or his face beyond the scar. Another loader, designation and length of service unknown, dead from heavy weapon fire. Tags recovered and processed. The system had documented him. I had not. The refit period lasted 3 weeks. We were billeted in a former industrial complex that had been converted to a temporary barracks. The conditions were better than the front-line positions. Enclosed structures, functioning sanitation, regular meals. I was assigned to a bunk in a section designated for heavy weapons operators. There were 6 of us. We did not speak unnecessarily. We performed maintenance on our weapons, submitted requisitions for replacement parts, and waited for deployment orders. A commissar visited during the 2nd week. He inspected our section, reviewed our equipment, and asked questions about operational readiness. He stopped at my bunk. He reviewed the maintenance log I kept for the heavy bolter. He asked how long I'd been operating the weapon. I told him 11 months in the previous sector with additional time before that. He asked how many loaders I'd been assigned. I told him about 43 in the previous sector. I did not have records for the earlier period. He processed this information. "You have survived longer than any heavy weapons operator currently in the regiment," he said. "This indicates competence, or extreme fortune, or both." I told him I had followed proper procedures and trained my loaders according to established protocols. He studied me. "You do not believe fortune was a factor." I told him fortune was always a factor, but procedure reduced the dependency on fortune. He nodded slowly. "You will be assigned a permanent loader for the next deployment. Someone with experience. We cannot continue replacing your position at the current rate. The training pipeline cannot sustain it." I acknowledged this. I did not tell him that assigning a permanent loader would not reduce the casualty rate. The casualty rate was determined by enemy action and tactical deployment, not by personnel assignment. An experienced loader would die at the same rate as an inexperienced one. But I did not say this. He was a commissar. Disagreeing with commissars had poor outcomes. The permanent loader arrived on the final day of the refit period. His name was Halvan. He was 22 standard years old. He had been operating as a loader for 14 months across 2 deployments. He had survived because his previous operator had been killed 4 months into the deployment, and he had been reassigned to a support role until a new operator position opened. He told me this during our initial briefing, providing context I had not requested. I briefed him according to my standard procedure. Enemy snipers would target our position. The probability of his death was high. I would not remember his name if the deployment lasted long enough. He listened without expression. When I finished, he said, "I have received this briefing before. I understand the risks. I am still here." I asked him why he had not requested reassignment to a different role. He looked at me as though I had asked something absurd. "There is no safer role," he said. "Infantry die. Support personnel die. Medicare dies. Heavy weapons teams die. The rate varies, but the outcome is consistent. I chose to remain in heavy weapons because I understand the function and I am competent at it." I acknowledged this logic. It was similar to the reasoning Tessin had provided. I did not tell Halvan what had happened to Tessin. I did not tell him that competence was not sufficient. He would learn or he would not. We were deployed to a new sector 4 days later. The sector was designated Morning Reach, though I never learned what the name referenced. The terrain was different from the Ashfield salient. Less urban rubble, more open ground, broken by defensive fortifications the enemy had established over months of preparation. Trench networks, bunker complexes, minefields. The operation was a breakthrough assault. We were to reduce the fortifications through sustained bombardment and infantry assault. Heavy weapons teams were assigned to suppression and anti-infantry roles. Halvan and I operated together for 6 months. He was competent. More than competent. He anticipated my requirements. He identified threats before I registered them. He maintained the weapon with the same obsessive attention I had developed. We functioned as a unit. I stopped verifying his work because verification was unnecessary. I trusted him. Not emotionally, operationally. But the distinction was becoming less clear. During an assault on a fortified bunker complex, we were separated from our platoon by an artillery barrage that collapsed the trench we were using for approach. The collapse buried 3 soldiers and cut us off from support. Halvan and I, carrying the weapon and 2 canisters of ammunition, were isolated in a crater field 200 meters from the nearest friendly position. Enemy combatants were aware of our position. They began advancing to exploit the gap the barrage had created. Halvan identified them first. He counted at least 20 hostiles moving through the defensive works. We were outnumbered and isolated. Standard procedure was to withdraw and attempt to rejoin friendly forces. Halvan looked at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. We both understood that withdrawal would expose the friendly position to assault through the gap we occupied. I set up the heavy bolter. Halvan loaded the first belt. We opened fire on the advancing enemy. The bolter's rate of fire was devastating at that range. We killed 14 hostiles in the first 30 seconds. The survivors went to ground, returning fire. Rounds impacted around our position. One struck the crater rim 30 centimeters from my head, spraying me with pulverized stone and metal fragments. We fired until the first ammunition canister was empty. Halvan swapped to the second. We continued firing. The enemy attempted to flank our position. Halvan identified the movement, called it out. I adjusted the fire. We suppressed the flanking element. Friendly forces, alerted by the sustained firing, advanced to reinforce our position. The enemy withdrew. We had held the gap. A lieutenant arrived with a reinforcement element. He assessed the situation, counted the enemy casualties, and looked at Halvan and me. "You held position alone against a platoon strength element," he said. I told him we had followed proper defensive procedure. He shook his head. "You should have withdrawn. You were isolated and unsupported. Doctrine is clear." I told him withdrawal would have compromised the defensive line. "That is not your decision to make," he said, but he did not pursue it. He ordered us to rejoin our platoon and return to the rally point. We complied. That night, performing maintenance, Halvan said, "We could have withdrawn." I told him we could have. "We would have survived," he said. "Probably. The enemy was focused on exploiting the gap. They would not have pursued us immediately." I told him this was a reasonable assessment. "But you chose to hold the position," he said. "Why?" I did not answer immediately. I was cleaning the barrel, inspecting it for heat stress and carbon buildup. The weapon had fired nearly 800 rounds in rapid succession. The barrel showed stress, but remained within tolerance. I told Halvan I had assessed that holding positions offered better tactical outcomes than withdrawal. "You risked both our lives on that assessment," he said. "You made the decision without consulting me." I told him he had been free to withdraw. I had not prevented him. He laughed. It was a strange sound. Not humorous. "I could not withdraw," he said. "If you held position and I withdrew, I would be shot for cowardice. If you held position and I withdrew, I would abandon the weapon. I could not do that." I acknowledged this. "You knew this," he said. "You knew I would stay if you stayed. You made the decision for both of us." I set down the cleaning tools. I looked at him directly. "Yes," I said. "I made the decision. The alternative was to abandon our position and allow enemy forces to compromise the defensive line. I assessed that outcome as unacceptable. I chose to hold. You chose to stay. We both made choices." He nodded slowly. "And if I had died?" "I would have reported the casualty and requested a replacement loader," I said. "The function would continue." He studied with me for a long time. Then he said, "You have been doing this too long. You process us as components, interchangeable parts that fail and require replacement. You do not see us as individuals." I told him I saw him as a competent loader who had survived longer than most and whose continued survival was operationally valuable. "But not personally valuable," he said. I did not respond. I returned to cleaning the weapon. Halvin did not speak further that night, but the next morning he reported for duty as scheduled. He fed ammunition, he assisted with repositioning, he performed his function. We continued. The campaign in Morning Reach lasted 8 months. Halvin survived the entire deployment. This was statistically improbable. I had operated with 43 loaders in 11 months at the Ashfield salient. I had operated with 1 loader for 8 months in Morning Reach. The difference was not explained by improved tactics or reduced enemy effectiveness. The difference was Halvin. He was skilled, cautious, and experienced. He understood the tactical environment completely. He identified threats before they developed into lethal engagements. He maintained situational awareness even under sustained fire. He was, in every measurable way, the most competent loader I had operated with, and I was going to get him killed. I knew this with increasing certainty as the deployment continued. Each engagement we survived did not reduce the probability of his death. It increased it. Probability accumulated. Chance depleted. Eventually, the mathematics would resolve. A sniper would acquire our position at the perfect moment. An artillery strike would land within lethal radius. A stray round would penetrate his armor. The method was uncertain. The outcome was inevitable. I began to dread each operation order, not for my own survival. I had stopped considering my own survival as a relevant factor months earlier. I dreaded the moment when I would hear the impact, turn, and see Halvin down. I dreaded the moment when I would process another casualty report and requisition another loader and continue the function. During the final month of the campaign, we were assigned to a blocking position defending against an enemy counter-offensive. The enemy committed armor and heavy infantry. Our position was targeted by sustained bombardment for 6 hours. Halvin and I, sheltered in a reinforced bunker with the heavy bolter, waited through the barrage. Explosions shook the structure. Dust and debris filtered through the ventilation. The lighting failed twice. We sat in darkness, listening to the impacts, counting the seconds between detonations. Halvin said, "If we die here, we will die together. The bunker will collapse and we will be buried. They will not recover our bodies for weeks, perhaps months, perhaps never." I told him the bunker was structurally sound and rated for sustained bombardment. "That is not the point," he said. "The point is, if we die, you will not have to report my casualty. You will not have to requisition a replacement. The function will end." I told him the function would not end. Another operator would be assigned. Another loader. The weapon would continue. "But not you," he said. "You would be gone. You would not have to carry it anymore." I did not respond. He was correct. If I died, I would not have to requisition the 44th loader. I would not have to brief them, train them, watch them die, and continue. I would not have to archive their names and fail to remember them. I would not have to become more of what I had already become. The barrage ended. We emerged from the bunker. The position had been heavily damaged but remained defensible. The enemy assault came 2 hours later. We held the position. Halvin survived. I survived. We continued. The campaign concluded with a negotiated withdrawal. Morning Reach was abandoned to enemy control. Strategic Command had determined that holding the sector was not operationally viable given casualty rates and supply line vulnerability. We extracted under covering fire, collapsing defensive positions as we withdrew. The heavy bolter was carried out. Halvin and I were reassigned to a different regiment, forming up for deployment to a sector designated only by numerical code. Before we deployed, Halvin was promoted. He was assigned to train as a primary heavy weapons operator. He would receive his own weapon, his own loader. He would become what I had become. He came to tell me this personally. He stood in front of my bunk, holding his reassignment orders, and said, "I learned everything from you. I will train my loaders the way you trained me." I told him that was operationally sound. "I will tell them they will die," he said. "I will tell them I will not remember their names. I will tell them the truth." I told him the truth was useful. He hesitated. Then he said, "I want to thank you for keeping me alive this long. I know you made decisions that prioritized my survival even when it was tactically suboptimal. I know you risked yourself to position me safely. I know you did not have to do this." I told him I had made decisions that prioritized operational effectiveness. His survival was a component of that effectiveness. He shook his head. "You cannot admit it. You cannot acknowledge that I mattered beyond my function. You have conditioned yourself not to. But I am telling you now, I mattered. I was not just a loader. I was Halvin. Remember that." I told him I would remember. He left. I did not see him again. I do not know if he survived his deployment. I do not know if he trained his loaders well. I do not know if he became what I became or if he retained something I had lost. I archived his name. I archived his face. I archived the memory of our conversation. I have accessed that archive repeatedly over the years that followed, checking to confirm the data remains intact. It remains intact. I have not forgotten Halvin, but I have forgotten the others. I was assigned a new loader the following week. His name was something that started with M, or perhaps it was N. I briefed him. I do not remember how long he survived. I was assigned another loader after him, and another, and another. The deployments blurred together. New sectors, new objectives, new tactical environments. The weapon changed twice more. The loaders changed constantly. I continued. There was a period where I was wounded severely enough that I could not operate. Shrapnel from a vehicle-mounted weapon had penetrated my chest and collapsed one lung. I was evacuated to a Medici facility, treated, assigned to recovery barracks. I spent 6 weeks in a state of enforced inactivity, unable to perform my function. During this period, I was unable to stop thinking. I thought about Corville, who had survived 11 months and told me I would forget his name. I had not forgotten his name. I thought about Tessin, who believed survival was replicable and had been killed by a mine. I thought about the loader with the scar who had asked about identification. I thought about Halvin, who had survived long enough to become an operator, and who had told me I mattered. I thought about the 43 loaders I had been assigned during the Ashfield salient deployment, I thought about the number that had accumulated since then. I did not have an exact count. I had stopped filing detailed casualty reports after a certain point, submitting only the minimum documentation required. But I estimated the number was over 70, possibly approaching 80. 80 individuals who had carried ammunition for me and died. I tried to remember them. I accessed every archive I had stored. I found fragments, a face, a gesture, a piece of conversation, but I could not assemble them into complete individuals. They had been compressed too thoroughly. They existed in my memory only as data points. Loader, duration of service, cause of death. The system had reduced them to statistics, and I had allowed it. I asked myself if I felt guilt. I attempted to process the question honestly. Guilt implied responsibility, and I was not certain I was responsible. I had not killed them. The enemy had killed them. The tactical deployments had killed them. The Imperium's strategic requirements had killed them. I had simply been present. I had operated the weapon. I had continued. But I had made choices. I had chosen to hold positions when withdrawal was possible. I had chosen to accept high-risk missions. I had chosen to prioritize operational effectiveness over loader survival. These choices had consequences. The consequences had accumulated in the form of 70 or 80 dead soldiers whose names I could not remember. I decided that I did feel guilt. But the guilt was non-functional. It did not change the past. It did not alter my future deployments. It did not resurrect the dead or restore their names to my memory. The guilt existed. I processed it. I archived it, and I prepared to return to duty. When I was cleared for combat operations, I was assigned to a new heavy weapons team forming in a different regiment. The weapon was newer than the previous model, with improved cooling systems and a higher rate of fire. The loader was young, 15, perhaps 16 standard years old. His name was Edric, or Aldrich. I briefed him according to procedure. He listened with an expression that suggested he did not believe me. That was acceptable. Belief was not required, only compliance. We deployed to a sector that had been under siege for 2 years. The front lines had not moved more than 3 kilometers in any direction during that time. We were assigned to rotational defense, holding positions for weeks at a time, repelling probing attacks and occasional assaults. The fighting was constant but low intensity. The casualty rate was described as sustainable. Edric survived 4 months. He was killed by an enemy sniper during a routine patrol. The round entered through his neck and severed the spinal column. Death was instantaneous. I reported the casualty. I was assigned a replacement the next day. The replacement survived 2 months, then another 3 weeks, then another 6 weeks. The pattern continued. I stopped attempting to archive their names. I stopped attempting to remember their faces. I briefed them, I operated with them, I reported their deaths. I continued. This was the function. This was what I had become. I have operated heavy weapons for 6 years now, or perhaps 7. The records are incomplete, and I no longer trust my own timeline estimates. I've been assigned to 9 different regiments across 14 different sectors. I've fired approximately 240,000 rounds. I've been wounded 11 times, 5 of those wounds severe enough to require medical intervention. I've been assigned 117 loaders. 117. I verified this number recently by reviewing all available personnel records and casualty reports. 117 individuals who served in the loader position assigned to my weapon. 117 soldiers who carried ammunition, fed belts, assisted with repositioning, and died. Some died in combat, some died from disease or infection in the field. Some died from accidents or equipment failure. Some simply disappeared during chaotic withdrawals and were listed as missing, presumed dead. But all of them are gone now, and I continue. I remember 3 of them clearly. Corvel, though he was an operator, not a loader. Tessin, who believed competence would save him. Halvin, who survived long enough to become what I am. The rest exist as fragments, or not at all. I have failed them in this way. I have allowed the system to erase them from memory. I have become the instrument of their erasure. I am currently assigned to a defensive position in a sector whose designation I have not bothered to learn. The terrain is similar to dozens of other sectors I have operated in. Destroyed infrastructure, chemical contamination, contested ground that changes hands periodically without strategic significance. My current loader is named something that starts with a V. Varen, possibly. Or Vorlin. He has been assigned to me for 9 days. He is competent and follows instructions. He will die at some point in the near future. I will report his death. I will be assigned a replacement. I will continue. I no longer brief my loaders the way I once did. I no longer tell them they will die. I no longer tell them I will not remember their names. These statements are true, but saying them serves no purpose. The loaders die whether I warn them or not. They are forgotten whether I acknowledge it or not. The briefing was a ritual I performed to maintain some connection to humanity, some acknowledgement that the individuals I operated with mattered. But I no longer maintain that connection. It is easier to simply operate. The weapon is the priority. This is what Corvel told me. This is what I have learned through 6 years of continuous operation. The weapon must be maintained. The weapon must be positioned correctly. The weapon must fire when required. The operator and loader are components of the weapon system. When components fail, they are replaced. The weapon continues. I have become the weapon. Or perhaps the weapon has become me. The distinction is no longer clear. I think in firing solutions and ammunition counts. I process threats and calculate ranges automatically. I dream in the rhythm of the bolter's cycle, the mechanical heartbeat that has replaced my own. I'm a firing platform that happens to be housed in biological tissue. The tissue is damaged, scarred, partially replaced with augmetic components after the most severe wounds. But the tissue persists, and therefore I persist, and therefore the weapon persists. I was told once, years ago, that heavy weapons operators who survive beyond 2 years are typically transferred to training roles. We are too valuable as sources of institutional knowledge to risk in continued frontline deployment. I have survived 6 years. I have not been transferred. I have requested transfer twice. Both requests were denied without explanation. I am assigned to operational deployment because I continue to function and because the system requires me to function and because I have not yet been killed. I will be killed eventually. The mathematics are clear. 117 loaders have died while assigned to my weapon. The operator position has only survived because I have been fortunate. Because I position myself behind the weapon, because the loaders absorb fire that might otherwise have killed me. But eventually a round will find me despite these factors. A sniper will calculate the precise angle. An artillery strike will land close enough. A vehicle-mounted weapon will acquire my position. The method is uncertain, the outcome is inevitable. I do not fear this outcome. Fear requires investment in continued existence, and I lost that investment somewhere between the Ashfield salient and Morning Reach. I exist now as process, not as person. I operate because operation is my designated function. When I cease operation, the system will assign another operator, and the function will continue without me. But sometimes, in the brief periods between operations when I perform maintenance or wait for deployment orders, I attempt to remember the names: Corville, Tessin, Halvin, and the others. The one with the scar, the one who asked about identification, the one who lasted 11 days, the one who was killed by shrapnel, the one who disappeared during the withdrawal, the one who... The archive is corrupted. I cannot retrieve additional data. I tell myself I remember them. I tell myself they mattered beyond their function. I tell myself that their deaths were not meaningless, that they serve the Imperium's strategic objectives, that their sacrifice contributed to humanity's continued survival across 1,000,000 worlds. I tell myself these things because the alternative is to acknowledge that they died for no reason at all, that their deaths change nothing, that the front lines remain contested and the enemy remains undefeated, and the war continues exactly as it would have continued if they had never existed. I do not know which narrative is true. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps neither. Truth has become a category I no longer process. Reliably, I know only what I have witnessed. I have witnessed 117 soldiers die. I have witnessed the weapon continue. I have witnessed the system perpetuate itself through their consumption and my survival. I have witnessed what the Imperium costs. The cost is measured in names I cannot remember. The cost is measured in faces that blur together into undifferentiated data. The cost is measured in the weight of 43 kilograms of ammunition carried across terrain that was once a city, by hands that could no longer feel, by a soldier who believed he was serving something greater than himself. I no longer believe this. I serve the weapon. The weapon serves the tactical objective. The tactical objective serves the operational goal. The operational goal serves the strategic imperative. The strategic imperative serves the Imperium. And the Imperium serves itself, consuming soldiers and cities and entire worlds to fuel its continuation. I am part of this machine now. I have been part of it since I was 17 years old, and I carried those first 2 ammunition canisters across the flats. I became part of it when Corville bled out and I took his weapon. I became more of it with each loader I trained and lost and replaced. I am component HB7743OP, biological firing platform, designation and individual identity, irrelevant, function continuous until termination. My current loader, whose name begins with V, is approaching. He carries a requisition manifest for additional ammunition. We are scheduled for a fire mission in 6 hours. We will establish a position overlooking an enemy-held structure. We will provide suppression while an assault element advances. We will fire until the mission is complete or until we are killed. If we are killed, another team will be assigned. The function will continue. I acknowledge the manifest. I verify the ammunition types and quantities. I instruct the loader to prepare for deployment. He complies, He is competent. He follows instructions. He will die at some point in the near future, and I will not remember his name. And the weapon will continue, and I will continue, and the system will continue, and the Imperium will continue, consuming everything it touches, forever. This is what I have witnessed. This is my testimony. This is the record I leave, though I do not know who will access it or why it matters. Perhaps it does not matter. Perhaps testimony is simply what remains when everything else has been consumed. I have operated heavy weapons for 6 years. I've survived 117 loaders. I've forgotten almost all of them. And I continue. Because continuing is the only function I have left. Because the weapon must fire. Because the system demands it. Because I have become the thing I once feared, and there is no other outcome available to me. The weight of the ammunition canister is 43 kilograms. I still remember this. I remember the mud, the chemical smell, the sound Corvell made when he was shot. I remember Tesson's face before the mine detonated. I remember Halvan telling me I mattered. These fragments persist in archive, corrupted but retrievable. They are all I have left of the person I was before I became this. It is not enough. It has never been enough, but it is the record, and the record is all that remains.